The air in the subway car was thick enough to chew, a heavy blanket of damp warmth mixed with the faint, metallic scent of brakes and something that might have been yesterday's rain. It was the kind of air that clung to your clothes and settled deep in your lungs. For the man squeezed near the center doors, this was just the texture of his life. He stood with one hand wrapped around a greasy silver pole, his knuckles white, while the other hand was shoved deep into his jacket pocket. His name was Alex, and he felt like a single gray pixel in a massive, unending picture of gray. He had his headphones in, a silent shield against the world. No music played through them. He preferred the dull thrum of his own heartbeat, the muffled roar of the train, and the quiet hum of his own thoughts. It was better than the alternative. To him, the world was just noise anyway. He looked around, not really seeing faces, but just a collection of moving parts. There was a woman, maybe a few years older than him, meticulously applying mascara in the reflection of her dark phone screen. Her hand was steady, her expression a mask of intense concentration. Alex watched her, a familiar wave of cynicism washing over him. She wasn't getting ready for her life, he thought. She was putting on a costume, a layer of paint to hide the exhaustion underneath. He wondered if she even knew who she was without it. His eyes drifted a few feet away. A man in a suit that looked too expensive for this grimy train was shouting into his phone. He wasn't talking, he was barking. Words like synergy, leverage, and Q3 projections cut through the general rumble of the car. The man's face was red, his forehead beaded with sweat that had nothing to do with the crowded car. He was a king in his own little world, a world made of numbers and deadlines, and he was making sure everyone knew it. Alex felt a pang of something, not quite annoyance, but a deep, tired pity. The man was just as trapped as the rest of them, only his cage was made of gold and had a better view. Then there were the teenagers, a cluster of them near the opposite doors, their laughter sharp and loud. It wasn't the joyful, uncontrolled laugh of a child. It was a performance. Each cackle was designed to prove they were having the best time, that they were invincible and part of a club that no one else could join. Alex saw the way one of them kept looking around, checking to see if people were watching them. They were all actors, playing their parts. The woman with the makeup, the man on the phone, the laughing kids, and him? He was the audience, a bored critic who had seen this terrible play 100 times before. He felt invisible, but he also knew that was a choice. It was easier this way. If you're invisible, you can't be let down. You can't be disappointed. You can just float through the sea of humanity, a ghost in his own life, and no one will ever ask you for anything you can't give. He used to be different. He remembered a time when his world was full of color. He used to carry a sketchbook everywhere. He would sit in parks and cafes, his pencil flying across the page, trying to capture the way the light hit a building or the genuine, unscripted smile of a stranger. He loved the smell of the paper, the feel of the charcoal dust on his fingers. He was creating things. He was alive. Now his art was a series of soul-crushing graphic design gigs. He spent 10 hours a day hunched over a computer in a tiny corner of his apartment, designing logos for companies with names like Optimal Ventures or Nexus Solutions. They all wanted the same thing. Something sleek, modern, and bold, which always ended up meaning a blue or gray geometric shape that looked like every other logo he'd ever designed. The passion had been squeezed out of him, drop by drop, until all that was left was this gray, empty feeling. The commute was just the bookends to his day, the gray journey from his gray apartment to his gray computer screen and back again. The train lurched violently, and the human mass swayed as one. Alex tightened his grip on the pole, the cold metal a small, solid reality in the haze. He looked at his reflection in the dark window. A tired face stared back, eyes hollow, mouth set in a flat, neutral line. He didn't recognize the person he saw, not really. He remembered the kid with the sketchbook, the kid who saw beauty in the cracks of the pavement and poetry in the rain-streaked windows of a bus. Where did that kid go? He was buried under years of compromise, under the weight of bills and the quiet desperation of trying to make a living in a city that didn't seem to care if you lived or died. As long as you paid your rent on time, he truly believed he was right about the world. that people were fundamentally selfish, trapped in their own little bubbles, performing for an audience that wasn't even paying attention. Kindness was a transaction. A smile was a strategy. No one did anything without a reason, without expecting something in return. Down here, in the belly of the city, you could see it for what it was. 1,000 lonely people pressed together yet miles apart. He was just one of them. He thought no one was watching, and honestly, he preferred it that way. Being seen meant being vulnerable, and he had forgotten how to be anything else. He was just another body on the train, another ghost fading into the background, completely convinced that his gray view of the world was the only truth there was. He had no idea that in just a few minutes, his entire philosophy was about to be challenged by the quietest person in the room. The train gave another violent shudder, a metallic groan echoing through the car as it rounded a sharp curve. The collective sway of the bodies was almost like a single, tired sigh. In that moment of movement, a seat near the sliding doors became empty. A man in a bulky coat had squeezed his way out just before the doors closed, leaving behind a small vacant rectangle of faded orange plastic. It was one of those undesirable seats, right in the line of fire for every new passenger, a spot that required constant vigilance and a bit of athletic maneuvering to keep. No one moved. A dozen eyes registered the empty space, and a dozen minds quickly calculated that the effort wasn't worth the reward. It was easier to just stay where you were, leaning and swaying, a part of the anonymous mass, but then a figure detached from the crowd near the center of the car. He moved with an easy, unhurried grace that seemed out of place amidst the frantic shoving and awkward balancing. He was dressed in a way that was almost a uniform for anonymity in the city, a dark, zip-up hoodie, worn-out jeans, and a dusty baseball cap pulled low. He carried a simple black backpack on one shoulder. He slid into the empty seat without making a sound, settling into it with the quiet ease of someone who was just glad to be off their feet. Alex watched him, his gaze sharp and analytical. He was always watching, always cataloging the small human dramas playing out in the corners of his vision. At first, the man was just another data point, another actor in the gray play. But something about the set of his jaw, the familiar curve of his nose as he turned his head slightly, tugged at a memory in the back of Alex's mind. It wasn't a personal memory, but one borrowed from 1,000 screens. It was a face he knew, but not in person. It was a face from late-night movies, from billboards, from the pop culture ether he tried so hard to ignore. The cap did a decent job of hiding it, but there was no mistaking it now. It was Keanu Reeves. The name landed in Alex's brain with a dull thud. His first reaction wasn't the jolt of excitement or starstruck wonder that most people might feel. It was something else, something colder and more familiar. It was a deep, resonant click of confirmation. Of course, he thought, a bitter taste rising in his throat. Of course it's him. It felt like the universe was playing a cruel joke on him, sending the poster boy for down-to-earth celebrity to validate his most cynical theories. Alex had seen the articles. The internet was littered with them. Keanu Reeves spotted on the subway. The 100 most humble celebs. Why we all love Keanu. He'd seen the pictures of him giving up his seat, the videos of him chatting with homeless people, the stories of him taking pay cuts so other actors could be cast. To the rest of the world, this was proof of a good man, a rare gem in the toxic world of fame. To Alex, it was just brilliant marketing. It was a brand. The humble superstar was a character Keanu Reeves played, and he played it perfectly. This whole subway thing, it wasn't a choice born of simplicity. It was a performance. The ultimate humble brag. He watched him not as a fan, but as a scientist observing a specimen in its natural habitat. He was looking for the cracks in the facade, the telltale signs that this was all just an act. The man sat with his back slightly hunched, his hands resting on his knees. He didn't pull out a phone. He didn't put on a pair of expensive, noise-canceling headphones to create an impenetrable bubble of fame. He just sat there, looking out the window at the blackness of the tunnel, his face illuminated by the occasional flicker of passing lights. Alex's mind raced, dissecting the performance. Look at him, he thought. He's not even trying. That's how good he is. He knows people are watching, so he's doing the opposite of what a celebrity would do. He's just being its genius. He imagined the publicist somewhere, smiling grimly. Let Keanu take the subway. It's great for his image. Alex felt a surge of anger, not at Keanu himself, but at the entire charade. This man, this millionaire, could be anywhere in the world. He could be in a quiet town car, in a private jet, in a mansion on a hill. But he was here on this stinking, crowded train, and Alex knew why. It was because being seen not acting, like a celebrity, was the most powerful celebrity move of all. He watched the way. Keanu's eyes would occasionally drift around the car, taking in the scene with a neutral expression. Alex saw this as reconnaissance. The actor was checking his audience. He was making sure his act of humility was being witnessed. He saw a woman glance over, do a double take, and then quickly look away, pretending she hadn't noticed. Alex saw it all. He saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes, the decision not to bother him. It was all part of the dance. The celebrity pretends to be a normal person, and the public pretends not to notice the celebrity. Everyone plays their part. The real difference, the one that made Alex's stomach clench, was choice. Alex was on this train because he had to be. This was his reality, his daily grind. It was the steel box that carried him from one piece of work he hated to another. For Keanu, this was a field trip. It was a novelty. It was something he could tell a talk show host about to get a round of applause. He could experience the grit and grime of the common man's life, and then, whenever he wanted, he could just get off and leave it all behind. He could ascend back to his world of wealth and comfort, a world Alex couldn't even imagine. For Keanu, the subway was a costume. For Alex, it was his skin. Alex leaned his head against the vibrating glass of the window, his eyes locked on the man in the hoodie. He was waiting. He was waiting for the mask to slip. He expected Keanu to eventually pull out his phone, a sleek, expensive model that would be a dead giveaway. He expected him to get a call and start talking in hushed, important tones. He expected something, anything. That would prove he was just like all the other powerful people Alex had ever seen, separate, entitled, and fundamentally different from the rest of them struggling in this crowded car. But for now, the man just sat there, a quiet island in a sea of noise. And in his own mind, Alex had already won. He had taken this symbol of supposed humility and turned it into fuel for his fire. He looked at Keanu Reeves and didn't see a good man. He saw a perfect illusion, a mirror reflecting a world that wasn't real. He was so sure of his own dark conclusions, so confident in his ability to see the truth behind the performance. He was watching, convinced he knew exactly what he was seeing. He had no idea that he was the one who was truly blind, and that in a few moments, the man on the seat would show him a reality so simple and so pure, it would shatter everything he thought he knew. The train began to slow, its rhythmic clatter softening into a more deliberate, grinding sound. The lights inside the car flickered, a brief, stuttering pulse that matched the weary feeling in Alex's chest. Another station. Another brief pause in the underground journey before being plunged back into the darkness. Through the grimy window, the tiled walls of the platform slid into view, a blur of white and green illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights. The automated voice crackled to life, announcing the station name in a flat, emotionless tone that was immediately swallowed by the screech of the brakes. With a final, heavy lurch, the train came to a stop. The doors hissed open, releasing a wave of air that smelled of disinfectant and street food. For a moment, there was a chaotic shuffle as a few people pushed their way out, escaping the packed car for the relative freedom of the platform. Then, the tide turned and a new wave of passengers began to force their way in. It was the same old story, a daily battle for inches of space, a silent, unspoken agreement to endure the discomfort together but separately. That's when he saw her. She was standing just outside the doors, hesitating on the edge of the platform, as if gathering the strength for a difficult climb. She was older, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, each one telling a story of a life lived long and hard. Her hair was white and thin, pulled back into a neat bun. She leaned heavily on a simple wooden cane, its handle worn smooth by years of use. In her other hand, she clutched a couple of canvas grocery bags, the kind that were meant to be reused 1,000 times. They looked heavy. The weight of them pulled her shoulder down, and the thin handles seemed to be cutting into her frail skin. She took a small, tentative step onto the train, her eyes scanning the crowded car for a place to stand. Or maybe, just maybe, for a place to sit. There was nowhere. The space by the doors was a solid wall of bodies. People were already pressed against each other, and there was no obvious gap for her to slip into. The doors began to chime their warning, a series of soft, insistent beeps that signaled the impending closure. The woman seemed to panic a little, shuffling forward awkwardly, trying to find her footing without losing her balance or dropping her bags. Alex watched, his heart a cold, hard stone in his chest. He didn't feel pity, not in the way a normal person might. He felt a grim, sickening sense of vindication. This was it. This was the perfect, real-time demonstration of everything he believed about the world. His eyes darted around the car, cataloging the reactions. Or rather, the lack of them. The man in the expensive suit, who had finished his phone call, was now staring intently at his own reflection in the dark window, adjusting his tie with a look of profound self-importance. The struggling woman was less than a foot from him, but she might as well have been on another planet. The teenagers were laughing again, their noise a shield against the world, their backs turned to the door. The woman with the makeup had successfully created her mask and was now scrolling through her phone, her thumb moving in a relentless, mindless rhythm. It was a masterpiece of collective indifference. Everyone had suddenly become an expert in the art of not seeing. They looked at their shoes, at the advertisements for lawyers and language classes plastered above the seats, at the specks of dirt on the floor. They would do anything, absolutely anything, to avoid making eye contact with the woman who was now swaying precariously as the train started to move. They had all received the same memo. It's not my problem. See? Alex thought, the words forming clearly in his mind. This is what I'm talking about. He felt a strange, detached sense of superiority. He was the only one who was truly seeing the situation for what it was. He wasn't looking away. He was observing the raw, ugly truth of human selfishness. These people weren't evil. They were just broken. They were so wrapped up in their own tiny, insignificant worlds that they had lost the ability to see the person right next to them. They were ghosts haunting their own lives, and he was the only one who could see through the fog, his gaze, sharp and judgmental, drifted from the crowd of the willfully blind and settled on the one person who mattered in his little experiment. The man in the hoodie, Keanu Reeves. He was sitting right there, in the prime position to see everything. He had a front row seat to this small, everyday tragedy. This was the real test. Not the test of whether a celebrity would be recognized, but the test of whether a human being would act like one. Alex's cynical mind was already writing the conclusion. He expected Keanu to do nothing. Why would he? He was probably exhausted from a long day of being famous. This was his downtime, his moment to just be a regular guy on the train. And what do regular guys do? They mind their own business. Alex watched him, looking for any sign of acknowledgement. A flicker of the eyes? A slight tensing of the shoulders? Anything? But Keanu was just looking out the window, his face impassive, hidden partially by the shadow of his cap. He seemed completely unaware of the drama unfolding a few feet away. Or maybe, Alex thought with a surge of bitter triumph, he was very aware and was just choosing to ignore it. That would be even better. That would prove his ultimate point that the humble celebrity was just a role, a costume he put on for the public. But in the anonymity of the crowd, when he thought no one was watching, he was just like everyone else, selfish, disconnected. The train was picking up speed now, swaying from side to side. The woman with the bags lost her footing for a second. Stumbling forward and bumping into a young man who barely flinched, just shifted his weight to keep his balance. She righted herself, her face a mask of quiet embarrassment and strain. The bags were slipping from her grasp. The chimes for the doors had stopped and the train was fully in motion, hurtling through the dark tunnel. The moment of opportunity had passed. She was trapped now. standing in a dangerous spot, struggling to hold on. A solitary figure of fragility in a car full of strong, able-bodied people who had decided she was invisible. Alex watched her. And then he looked back at the man in the seat. He was waiting for the final piece of evidence, the confirmation that his dark view of the world was the correct one. He was so sure of what he would see, or rather what he wouldn't see. He was watching Keanu Reeves, convinced he knew exactly what was going on in his head, convinced he was watching the final act of a play called Humanity. He had no idea that the play was about to change, and that the actor he had cast as the villain was about to deliver a line that would rewrite the entire script. The train was a living thing, a beast of steel and noise that swayed and groaned as it raced through the dark tunnel. The woman with the cane was a small, fragile ship in a storm of indifferent bodies. She had managed to find a small patch of floor to stand on, but she was not steady. With every lurch of the train, her body would list to one side, her grip on the overhead pole tightening, her knuckles turning white. The canvas bags, heavy with who knows what, swung like pendulums, threatening to throw her off balance completely. Her face was a picture of quiet endurance, a tight, controlled mask that hid a world of strain and weariness. Alex watched, his arms crossed over his chest, a silent judge in a courtroom of his own making. He had already delivered his verdict, guilty of apathy, guilty of selfishness, guilty of being exactly what he expected them to be. His eyes flicked back to the man in the hoodie, the final piece of evidence in his case. The man was still looking out the window, his profile a calm, unmoving shape against the blackness. See? Alex thought again, the thought a cold, hard stone of certainty. Nothing. He's going to do nothing. He's just like the rest of them. But then something happened. A movement so small, so unremarkable that Alex almost missed it. The man in the hoodie shifted his weight. It wasn't the annoyed shuffle of someone trying to get more comfortable. It was a deliberate, purposeful movement. He uncrossed his legs. He placed his hands on his knees and pushed himself up. He stood, Alex's breath caught in his throat. His mind, a machine built for cynicism, immediately kicked into overdrive, trying to find an explanation, a loophole. His stop is coming up, it reasoned. He's just getting ready to get off the train. It's a coincidence. He held on to this thought like a life raft. He watched, his eyes narrowed as the man didn't move towards the doors. He moved towards the center of the car, towards the struggling woman. Each step was quiet, careful. The train lurched again, a violent, side-to-side motion that made several people grunt in annoyance. The man in the hoodie barely seemed to notice. He moved with an easy balance, his feet planted firmly on the swaying floor. He was navigating the chaos as if it were calm water. Alex's heart started to beat a little faster. The life raft of his excuse was starting to spring a leak. If he was just getting off at the next stop, why was he moving in the wrong direction? The man reached the woman. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there for a second, a solid presence in the chaos. Then he reached out and gently touched her arm. It was the lightest of touches, just a tap, but it was enough to make the woman turn her head, her eyes wide with surprise. She flinched slightly, a reflex from a life of being jostled and ignored, when she looked up at him. The man in the hoodie gave a small, almost shy smile. It wasn't a big, flashy Hollywood grin. It was just a simple, gentle curve of the lips. It was a smile that said, "It's okay. I see you." He then gestured with his head towards the empty seat he had just vacated. The woman looked from his face to the seat and back again, a flicker of confusion and then dawning understanding in her tired eyes. She started to shake her head, a polite refusal, but he was already moving. He didn't wait for her permission. He simply took the heavy grocery bags from her hand. Alex watched, completely frozen. His cynical mind had gone silent. All the rationalizations, all the bitter explanations had evaporated. There was no excuse for this. This wasn't a performance. A performance would have been louder, more dramatic. This was quiet. This was real. The man took the bags, and for a second his arm dipped under their unexpected weight. He adjusted his grip, his muscles tensing slightly, and then he steadied them. He handled her groceries with the same care someone might handle a fragile bird. With his other hand, he gently guided the woman by her elbow, leading her the few steps to the now empty seat. He didn't push her or rush her. He just provided a steady, supportive presence as she shuffled carefully across the moving floor. When she reached the seat, she sank into it with a deep, audible sigh of relief. It was the sound of a weight being lifted, not just from her arms, but from her entire being. The man then bent down and placed the grocery bags carefully on the floor at her feet, arranging them so they wouldn't tip over when the train moved. He made sure they were secure before he straightened up. The woman looked up at him, her eyes shining with a gratitude so pure and so profound that it felt like a physical force in the crowded car. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words seemed to be caught in her throat. "Thank you," she finally whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." The man in the hoodie just gave another small nod and that same shy smile. He didn't say a word. He didn't wait for more thanks. He didn't draw any attention to himself. He simply turned and walked back to the center of the car, grabbing an overhead pole and becoming just another anonymous commuter. His face once again hidden by the brim of his cap, Alex was still frozen, his hand gripping the silver pole so tightly his fingers had gone numb. The world around him seemed to have faded into a dull, meaningless blur. The man shouting into his phone, the teenagers laughing, the woman with her makeup, they were all gone. The only thing that was real was the quiet, powerful act of kindness he had just witnessed. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a heroic deed. It was just a man giving up his seat and helping someone with their bags. People did that, right? It was supposed to be a normal, decent thing to do. But Alex knew it wasn't. Not in this world. Not on this train. He had been watching, studying, cataloging for months. And he knew that this kind of simple, unselfconscious decency was as rare as a diamond in a pile of gravel. He had built an entire philosophy on the belief that people were fundamentally selfish, that kindness was a transaction, that no one did anything without a motive. And in the span of 30 seconds, that philosophy had been shattered. It hadn't just been challenged. It had been completely and utterly dismantled, piece by piece, by a quiet man in a hoodie who didn't even want to thank you. The man wasn't watching to be seen. He wasn't performing for an audience. He was just a good person. He saw someone who needed help, and he helped them. It was that simple. And that simplicity was the most shocking, most profound thing Alex had ever seen. He had gone looking for proof that no one cares, and instead, he had found a truth so powerful it knocked the air out of his lungs. The gray, cynical world he had so carefully constructed around himself had just been cracked wide open, and for the first time in a very long time, a little bit of light was pouring in. The train rattled on, a steady, hypnotic rhythm that usually lulled Alex into a state of numb resignation. But not tonight. Tonight, every clatter of the wheels, every hiss of the air brakes sounded different. It was like he was hearing the world for the first time. His eyes were fixed on the scene he had just witnessed, replaying it in his mind again and again. The woman in the seat sat with her back a little straighter now. The deep lines of strain around her eyes had softened. She wasn't just resting. She was beaming. It was a quiet, internal glow, but it was powerful enough to light up the space around her. Every so often she would glance over at the man holding the pole, a look of pure, unadulterated gratitude on her face. The man in the hoodie, however, had become a ghost again. He stood with his back to her, his face turned towards the darkness of the tunnel, just another body in the crowd. He had done his part and had seemingly erased himself from the equation. He wasn't waiting for praise. He wasn't basking in the good feeling of his own deed. He was just there. And to Alex, this was the most incredible part of it all. The act of kindness had been given freely, with no expectation of return. It was a gift with no strings attached, a concept so foreign to Alex's worldview that it felt like he was trying to understand a new color. A few stops later, the train began to slow down. The automated voice announced the station. The woman in the seat began to gather her things, slowly and carefully. She pushed herself up, her movements still stiff but with a newfound ease. She picked up her grocery bags, which the man had placed so thoughtfully on the floor. As she shuffled towards the doors, she paused beside him. She didn't say anything. She just looked up at his face, still mostly hidden in the shadow of his cap. She gave him a small, warm smile and a nod that seemed to say more than words ever could. It was a nod of shared humanity, a silent acknowledgement of a moment that had passed between them. The man turned his head slightly, meeting her gaze for a brief second. He returned the nod, a simple, almost imperceptible dip of his chin. And that was it. The doors opened, and she stepped out onto the platform, disappearing into the crowd. The doors closed, and the train moved on. The moment was over. But for Alex it had just begun. His stop was the next one. As the train pulled into the station, he felt a strange sense of reluctance to leave. It was as if the train car, the site of this small miracle, had become a sacred space. But he knew he had to go. He followed the flow of people out onto the platform and up the stairs towards the street. The cool night air hit his face, and he took a deep breath. The city smelled the same as it always did, a mix of exhaust fumes, roasted nuts from a street vendor, and the damp, earthy smell of the pavement after a rain. But tonight it didn't smell like decay. It just smelled like life. He started walking towards his apartment building, a route he had walked 1,000 times. But tonight, everything looked different. The harsh, unforgiving neon signs of the shops seemed to be painting the wet streets with vibrant, beautiful colors instead of just garish light. He saw a young couple huddled under a single umbrella, laughing about something, and instead of feeling a pang of cynical envy, he felt a small, genuine warmth. He saw a man in a tuxedo sharing a hot dog with a homeless man, and for the first time he didn't question the man's motives. He just saw an act of sharing. The gray film that had been covering his eyes for so long was starting to peel away. He was an artist again, but his medium was no longer charcoal and paper. It was the world itself. He was noticing the details again. The way the reflections of the city lights danced in a puddle. The intricate ironwork on an old fire escape. The lonely, beautiful song of a single saxophone drifting down from an open window somewhere high above. These were the things he used to live for. The things he used to try and capture in his art. He had forgotten they were there, hidden in plain sight. Buried under his own bitterness, he reached his apartment building and climbed the 4 flights of stairs to his floor. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. It was the same small, cramped apartment. The same pile of unpaid bills on the counter. The same stack of soul-crushing design magazines on the table. But it didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It just felt like a room. A room where he lived. He walked over to his desk and sat down in his worn-out chair. The computer screen was still on, glowing with that horrible, soulless logo he had been working on. The geometric blue shape stared back at him, a symbol of everything he had become. He looked at it, and for the first time, he felt not just resignation, but a flicker of anger. Not a hot, destructive anger, but a quiet, firm anger that said, "I don't want this anymore." He moved the mouse. He didn't just close the file. He clicked Save As, named it Final Corporate Trash, and then dragged it into the trash bin on his desktop. He hit Empty Trash. It was a small, symbolic act, but it felt like he was setting a part of himself free. He sat there for a long time, just staring at the now empty desktop. The blue background was a clean slate. He thought about the man on the train. He still didn't know his name, not really. To the world, he was Keanu Reeves, the movie star. But to Alex, he was just a man who saw someone who needed help and helped them. The story wasn't about the celebrity. The celebrity was just the messenger. The message was about the act itself. The message was that in a world full of people pretending not to see, all it takes is one person to open their eyes. He opened a blank document. The white page glowed on the screen, a vast empty space full of possibility. He thought about the woman with the cane, the heavy bags, the look of relief on her face. He thought about the quiet nod, the gentle touch, the simple, profound power of an unselfish act. He placed his fingers on the keyboard. He didn't write about a movie star. He didn't write about the subway. He wrote about a single moment of connection between 2 strangers. He wrote about how one person's quiet decency could be a loud, defiant shout against the darkness. He wrote about how he had been watching for all the wrong things and how, finally, he had learned how to see. The words began to flow, a river that had been dammed up for years, finally breaking free. He was no longer a ghost in his own life. He was watching. He was seeing. And he was finally starting to live again.